Welcome to Yoga Teachers Masterclass. I'm Paula Mitten, and today I'm speaking to Tiffany Cruikshank, the founder of Yoga Medicine. Tiffany is an internationally recognized Seattle-based yoga teacher. She regularly teaches for Yoga Glow, and she travels the world extensively teaching. She's also the author of the book Meditate Your Weight, and I'm absolutely delighted to get the opportunity to speak with Tiffany today. So Tiffany, thank you so much for taking this time out of your day.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you came to work in this holistic industry?
Yeah, I was pretty young and I was a troublemaker. And my parents sent me away on a wilderness program, and I met an herbalist there who would take me out on plant walks. And, you know, for me, it was really about coming into myself. I was 14, and so learning how to survive, but then learning how to use plants as medicine. When I came home, I saw a little sign that had yoga and a phone number, and there weren't any studios at the time. So I was, I remembered the phone number. There wasn't even the internet at the time. And I kept practicing, and there was just something to it. I mean, there was something deeper. I was always really athletic, but there was a physicality, but always something more. And, so I started studying, and I got through high school quickly and started college when I was 16, because I really wanted to learn and get into it. I was so interested in herbal medicine. I was apprenticing with an herbalist, and then in college I apprenticed with an acupuncturist, and this kind of art of healing was just so intriguing to me and inspiring to me. And yoga really for me was always a big part of that. And I remember so then I went on to Chinese medicine. So I did my pre-med undergrad, and then I did my 4 years of Chinese med. I remember my parents always saying, sometimes I'd have 13 classes a quarter. And I remember them saying and I would teach 10 yoga classes a week. I don't even know how I did it now. They would say, why are you still teaching when you're going to quit when you get a real job? There's no way to answer that. But yeah, for me, yoga was always such an important part of that. And over the years, over the past few decades, it's kind of just slowly evolved and become more clear exactly what that means to me. But when I started seeing patients, yoga was a big part of in Chinese medicine. A big part of what I would use with my patients. I would always give them yoga prescriptions, because I found it was really such an important modality to keep their healthcare and wellness going when I wasn't seeing them. And then as I started running teacher trainings, I incorporated more of that into it. So yeah, for me, it's always just been this intrigue with the body and the mind, and the yoga practices is such an accessible and relevant tool for everyone if I can adapt it to that person's needs. So
yes, yeah. And so was a lot of the yoga that you were doing one-on-one with students, or were you doing group classes as well? What way did that work?
So I've always taught group classes. I started teaching when I was 16, and I've always taught group classes. And the one-on-one stuff I did was mostly with my patients. So a lot of what I did was one-on-one with my patients. The first 10 years of my career, I saw 60 patients a week. So
wow.
Yeah. So, well, maybe not the first year, maybe wasn't quite 60, but a lot. So I was using it with them one-on-one in that sort of setting, and doing some privates as well. But both.
Great. And can you talk to us a little bit about the difference between when you teach? Is there a difference between when you teach a group class and when you teach a private class, or when you do a private session with a student? Is it something that you can kind of get the same feeling in a group class?
It's the same postures and the same feeling. It's the same practice, but the way you teach it is so completely night and day different. And I think over the years, I've also struggled with, how do I bring more of that into the group classes? And I think it's tricky, because the reality is, when you're working one-on-one, you can look at this person and really individualize it to who they are and what they need in that moment. Whereas in a group class, even if you only have 10 people or 5 people, each person is such a different person, and I'm not having that intimate interaction with them and asking questions. So I'm just making a lot of guesses. And I definitely think there's ways to be more individualized in a group class, but it really requires that the student have a base of self-awareness, of body awareness, which is, the base of everything we do in yoga. And I think one of the reasons why it's so important to have yoga in the healthcare system, because it teaches patients body awareness and allows them to be more proactive in their healthcare, which is, so important.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of tools do you use, or what do you do then in the group class to get your students to really start to be more mindful?
I think the best thing as teachers, the best thing that I've found, and I'm hoping we'll continue to evolve this as we do in the yoga community, which is beautiful to watch. For me, the best thing I found is asking questions. Is recognizing that, everyone's different. We do these cadaver dissections in our trainings, and it's like, you don't know until you get all the way down to the bone how different everyone is. And, you do, you see differences all along the way, but from the exterior, who knows? And, I think as a yoga teacher, you have to leave space for the fact that everyone's different, both on a physical level, as well as their mental state, their mental environment, what they're going home to, their past experiences, their really framing. And gosh, it's so interesting as we look at pain science now, it's just changed so much in the past decade. Is like, we know that our interpretation in a sensory body is really based on the context of our past and our emotions and everything else. So to kind of have the illusion that I know every student in my group class is kind of silly, because there's no way I could, even in a one-on-one setting, there's so much I don't know. So I really think the best thing is offering questions, is educating them and letting them know. I think, sometimes we don't really know what's right until we understand a little bit more about the body or the mind. And, I think as a group teacher, I'm always in it for the long game of like, I'm not going to be able to teach them everything every class, but I have to be okay with a little bit of like imperfections or chaos, because, the body is made to move in so many directions. It's made to adapt to stress. But what I want to have is that long game in mind, so that I'm just planting little seeds of information each time. And the people who study with me regularly as a teacher eventually are going to have a whole arsenal of information and tools at their disposal that they can use both on and off their mat. And, the only real way to individualize that is for them to have an understanding of a base of body awareness. And then for me to ask the questions and plant the seeds of information so that they can investigate and decide for themselves. And ultimately, even when I'm working one-on-one with them, ultimately my job is to be a really good listener. Mm-hmm. And, I think that really requires a great depth of knowledge of the body to kind of have these different kind of views of the body: energetic, physical, mental. But yeah, ultimately my main job is really to be a great listener.
Right, yeah, because even every time that you come to the practice, it depends on what you've left behind in the day or the morning. When you step into the studio, like I find myself some days I'm looking for different things when I come into a class, for example, and if the teacher presumes that I'm just looking for a strong practice, or I'm looking for something because that's maybe what I usually look for, then you don't get what you need.
And you really don't know. And then there's that whole like, well, what do you guys want today? And even if you only have 5 people, like 2 of them are like, I want hip openers. And the others are like Gumby and maybe don't need hip openers. It's like, even you get that illusion by asking them, you get this illusion of what you think they want, but you still only hear from 1 or 2 people, and you still only hear like one tiny little snippet of information. And maybe that's not actually, maybe that's what they want, but not what they need.
Yes.
Teacher, one of the most important things we can do is teach to the stated level and description of the class, so that students know what they're getting. And then obviously maybe your description is that each week it's totally different. I don't know. I mean, that could be a thing too, but so that people they know what to expect, and they can be the people using these as tools and deciding what they need, which is, I think could be more helpful than, obviously asking's nice. It makes them feel like they're part of it. And it feels more like a community if you can ask those questions. And so obviously there's different reasons for all of these things, but we don't ever know.
Yes. And so I have taken your anatomy, your online anatomy training, and I know that you have like a huge knowledge of anatomy. I mean, I know that's super important when you're teaching and you're weaving that information into your classes. Can you talk a little bit about how you do that and how it helps you to, because you were saying earlier how until we get down to the bones that we don't really know whether somebody's going to be able to do a pose or how it's going to be. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
For me, the physical body is an access point that everyone can connect to. And there's so many great practices in yoga, but the physical body gives us something that everyone can connect to that isn't scary or intimidating. Like, not everyone is interested in the spiritual practices, or maybe they have very strong religious beliefs and are intimidated. I grew up, my parents were very religious. And so it was always, I think I always have that in the back of my head of really trying to make it something that's accessible for everyone that they can connect to. And for me, the anatomy can be an entry route into a mindful spiritual practice. But, I think having a deeper understanding of anatomy helps us understand how the body moves, its tendencies, where things can go wrong, some potential limitations or obstacles. And ultimately then we still have to keep paying attention to who this person is and modifying it. It also gives us some framework just to understand movements and maybe be more creative as we understand the body's need for diversity in movements and range of motion, and strength and mobility. And I think the question is, how do you learn the anatomy? And I think there's so many great courses out there, but what I really recommend is that it's just a constant process. As a teacher, just pick a muscle and make it your theme. And maybe that's not even a theme you say in your classes. Maybe it's just something you're thinking about in your practice, which kind of bleeds over into your teaching but I think allowing yourself to be immersed in it somehow and allowing it to be a continual evolution is a really important thing. People often come to me and ask me that, and it's like, well, it's not like one course. Yes, there are courses that explain it really well, and there are teachers that bring it alive, but ultimately it's up to you to kind of chew on it and use it and let it percolate and let it kind of distribute into the different parts of your practice. I recommend just slow and steady. Find something that's helpful, or grab a book, or grab a course, but experiment. And this is what I love about the body is one of the things I love doing with teachers is teaching them how to think for themselves. I think there's so many incredible styles out there that are useful for someone. They all have a really important place. And, one of the things that drew me to creating yoga medicine was just seeing that diversity in my patients of, there's not a cookie cutter approach that works for everyone. Mindfulness, maybe, body awareness, everyone, that's universal. But when we look at the movements and the shapes, and so what I really wanted to do was demystify it by bringing in this awareness, this modern day awareness, which we have now, which we didn't at the formation of yoga, and a lot of the evolution of yoga, but to bring in our modern day understanding of anatomy and physiology so we can deconstruct it and understand, are these things that are wrong really bad for the body? Or maybe there was something that I'm not claiming to be a teacher to teach you how to become enlightened, because I'm not, but I can definitely look at the physical postures and then know that there's some kind of context that maybe has a bigger picture to it sometimes, but is it a bad movement or a wrong movement, or is this a better movement? And in some contexts, yes, there are some things we want to avoid, and sometimes there's not. So being able to demystify it, I think, is important to me, but also I think there's sometimes this fear-driven orientation, like, you can't do that, that's wrong, or you're going to hurt your body. And yeah, sometimes that's true. Sometimes there are things we want to avoid, but I personally prefer to approach it from the opposite orientation rather than scaring people and instilling fear, which is going to, again, change how they move, how they relate to their body. I think fear-based tactics never work out well for people, because then I live in my body full of fear. And our bodies are made to adapt to challenges. Our bodies are these incredible adaptation machines that, it's incredible. So if I can embrace that and just be dedicated to continuing to understand the body and the mind and the spirit and the energetic and, all of these different facets, I think it's really what gives yoga its depth, is being able to look, not just the physical, like my specialty is orthopedics and sports medicine. And it's really great to look at the physical, but we clearly know that that's not all there is to it. We look at something like pain science and we know, like, a lot of pain is our interpretation. It's a signaling issue. And obviously, if I have a traumatic injury, there's something mechanical there, but pain is a communication message. So, we know now, even in science, that there's more to this body than just this one dimension of movement. And so what's brilliant about yoga is being able to layer in all these facets and see there's this physical body, there's this mind body, there's this energetic body, there's this spiritual body. And, as a yoga teacher, I want to leave space for all of those and just be able to meet the person where they're at. And I think, one, listen really well, but two, ask the right questions, to point them into their own investigation, which, in medicine, we kind of think of as like this black and white mentality of like, this is one way to do it. You either have this diagnosis or you don't. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of modern day physicians are also moving toward this place of like, hey, it's not that simple. There's so much more to our health and wellness than just, do I have the diagnosis or do I not? And so many things influencing it. And, I think this is why it's a brilliant time for yoga to enter into the medical world and to be a part of that, and not replace medical care, of course, but to be a foundation of learning and knowledge for the patient, to be a way to kind of guide them along their health and wellness. And as teachers, I always have teachers come into our trainings that they're really inspired, but then sometimes they start to feel like they learn so much in their trainings that then maybe they want to go on to medical school. And I keep reminding them, like, don't forget, even as a doctor, there's still so much we don't know. There's still so much mystery. There's this illusion that as a doctor or a physician or a healthcare provider, like that I know all the answers or that you know all the answers, but there's so many things we don't know. And so as a yoga teacher, I need to leave space to live in that mystery by asking the questions, by allowing the person to do the investigation. And I think this is such a powerful place for yoga to live. And so as a teacher, to be dedicated to continuing to learn, but also leave space for the unknown and the mystery and the magic sometimes that happens, with the practice is, it's a fine line.
Yes. Yeah. And I love what you say about the right and the wrong, because I suppose it's more traditional ways of practicing. It's like you do it this way and that's the only way you do it. But actually the being mindful in the practice and exploring and feeling, how does it feel? Because your body will tell you, right? Your body's going to tell you if it doesn't feel right, there's something wrong. If every time you do something, your body complains, then it's not right for you. Or it kind of brings all the different elements of the practice, not just the physical, into it. And
it allows us to kind of slow down too and deconstruct this, like, is it painful? Or, obviously I want to do this in a safe way, but like, is it discomfort? Is it pain? How do I sit with this? Is it a communication issue? How do I deconstruct that? And also leave space for all the other things. Because anytime I point my attention to one part of the practice, there's a whole lot I leave out. So I think there's such a big place for, practicing without the knowledge of alignment and anatomy, like maybe focusing on the breath or maybe focusing on my body awareness without having to have this idea of the shape of the pose having to look a certain way or be a certain way. So I think there's so much space for all of this, and you have to decide what's going to be most relevant for you or your student that day, right. And leave space for all of it.
How do you communicate that mindfulness in the practice to people who are newer to the practice? When you have people who come in and they don't have that connection with their body. So, you ask them what they're feeling or what they're experiencing, and they don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think this is the hard, but the simple part, right? So, it's simple things like meditation or pranayama, getting them on their back, doing diaphragmatic breathing is a really great place to start. Hands on the belly. That's one we're all so familiar with. And as yoga teachers, I think it's a great reminder. We forget the potency of the simplest things we do. And, if I'm working one-on-one with someone, again, it's the questions I'm asking, like, ooh, do you feel that in your foot? Or do you feel your foot on the ground? Can you push into your foot on the ground? Can you sense that foot is supporting you? Can you feel a connection from your foot to your hip? And the answer might be no for a very long time, and that's okay. I'm creating the neurologic pathways for that to happen at some point, and, and creating that framework for their experience to happen. And so, that might be in movement, it might be in meditation, it might be leaving space for the fact that, if I'm asking them to sense the awareness in their hands or in a specific finger and they don't, that not feeling something is also an experience. Yes. So, it's like, it's the simple things we do that I think are really important for that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really important for yoga teachers to remember, because like you were saying, some teachers feel like they have to go off to medical school. I think we forget how much we know compared to the students who are coming in, right?
Absolutely. And it's funny because every training I see usually a few or maybe even a handful of doctors come in who are sick of the medical world. I know obviously it's different in the US than other places, but doctors work so hard. They, their hours are crazy. And in America, they have a ridiculous amount of debt and they make almost no money for a very long time as a resident. And it's brutal. I mean, they did a survey here not too long ago, maybe 5 years ago or just a few years ago, where they asked a really large panel of doctors how many would recommend or want their children going into medicine. And it was less than 20%.
Wow.
Which you would ask doctors that when I was a kid, I bet it would have been 90%.
I think it's a lot higher here. I mean, I don't know. I'd love to find out, because that's shocking, isn't it?
But my point is, the grass is always greener. As a doctor, with it comes responsibility. Now you're their primary care provider. You're responsible for finding and catching everything. And I think there's something so valuable and precious about being able to be in the experience with them and not having to have all the answers. Because like I said, there's so much in medicine that we don't know and understand yet. And I think it's so important to leave space for that and not have to have the answers, not have to diagnose, but to let them live in the experience in their body, which, I might have a diagnosis of a rotator cuff injury or something, and my experience might change significantly, even though the diagnosis might stay the same. Maybe it doesn't change overnight, maybe it does, but, it's evolving slowly. And there might be things I can see on a scan, but, the way I approach that with a student is going to be very different based on their experience. And I don't need to overthink that. So I think as yoga teachers, we actually have a really powerful place. And we need to acknowledge that. And we need to also know the restrictions of that, hey, we're not medical providers. We're not there to take over their medical care. I think it's really important that we extend an open hand to work with their doctors and their medical team and not try and undermine what they're being told. And, remember that we all have blind spots. Even in the medical world, there's so many things that, nowadays you have to specialize just to be really deep in any one area of knowledge. And so we all have blind spots, but we have to be able to work together. And, the beauty of yoga is that it really lives in the experience, and there's no right and wrong in that.
Yes. And you can hand the power to the student, like you give them the information, and then you guide them to connect with themselves and to actually find the solutions themselves as well.
Yeah. And I love this. Again, it's like, there's no right or wrong in your experience. That's powerful. Like, you can say, well, you should have pain, you shouldn't have pain, but like, you don't have pain, or you do have pain, like a lot of times, oh, well, it doesn't make any sense. We can't find a reason why you're in pain, but there's pain, it's like, and obviously, you can't deny the experience. So.
Yeah. And you use the, like meditation as a, as a technique completely separate to the asana practice to help with that sort of physical release that comes from emotions.
I think the meditation part is so important. And I love that meditation's having this big movement right now. If you had told me that 25 years ago, I would have never believed you. But, it's so accessible. Anyone can do it. You could do it in a lot of different positions. So finding a position that's comfortable for you. And, it's incredible to see things like large research studies come up on lower back pain and doing meditation, which we all know, if you've ever sat in meditation, lower back pain is not the thing that goes away. We all have a little bit of achiness in our back from time to time, or maybe most of the time, or all of the time when we're sitting. And so it's really cool to see studies come up that have success just using meditation to work with lower back pain, to mediate that communication in the brain, to be able to help decipher the stimulus within the control center by going straight to the source. You know, having that top-down approach, working from the central nervous system is such a brilliant thing. And, you know, I've studied orthopedics for a long time now. And after a couple of decades of teasing away all of that, the more and more I look at it, the more I realize the power of the mind. I mean, you see now, like Harvard University has a whole department of placebo, which to me, when I heard that years ago, I was like, that's the power of the mind. That's like, that's what we're talking about. That's us. And it's really cool. I mean, we have this negative perception of placebo, but the reality is that's the potential of the mind when you harness it.
Yeah, it's so true. I used a technique like that for back pain, but like unexplained back pain, that my physio said, there's no way, you must have injured yourself. Like you couldn't have this back pain without it. MRI scans, everything, nothing showing up. And I read a book that was talking about that connection with your emotions and cleared it completely.
You know, it's interesting actually, is Boeing did a big study, and the biggest correlation between lower back pain they saw was job happiness within their job.
Really?
Yeah, satisfaction with their job and lower back pain. I thought that was really interesting. And yeah, so maybe you keep your eye out, see what you see. That's a tough one to swallow, though. Like, how do you know, as a yoga teacher, I'm not going to ever encourage my student to leave their job, but the seeds we plant for them to take the initiative to find happiness. And a lot of times I can find that in my job, even if I don't like it. I can find ways to connect with people or have empathy for people. I think this is a really big thing that yoga offers us, is this empathy as we start to become more embodied in ourselves and have empathy for ourselves. You know, it starts there. I have to have this awareness first. Then I can start to build empathy for myself. And only then can I start to build empathy for someone else. And then start to really connect to people. And that's where we see this communities changing, you know, the world changing, the impact of if, you know, we all had this embodiment and this empathy and this awareness, how much different our interactions would be. But it all stems from a very simple source.
Yes. Yes. Tiffany, we're way over.
I know.
We could talk all day. But before we finish up, can you tell everybody where they can find your information on your training and your workshops and everything that you offer?
Yeah, it's just yogamedicine.com. We're on all the social media as Yoga Medicine as well. And then we've got a couple nonprofits on there too that do both research as well as some nonprofit in working in human trafficking in India too. So we got books on there. We got articles, online courses. You can dig around in there for a while. So.
And it's all on Yoga Medicine. Great. Okay. So thank you so much for taking time out of your day. Thanks to everybody for watching. And I will see you all again tomorrow with our next expert. So I'll say goodbye for now.
Thank you for the great conversation.
Thank you.